Hello and welcome to the fourth and final week of my input to ICS 5112. In the previous online postings we saw two worlds of reality and meaning and how they could merge. And now we'll conclude by describing the final world and its balance for a triadic game design. Ask a random person about what a game is and, well, expect to receive random responses. A typical person who likes to play games at home might even describe how playing Monopoly is a good game to play for him. An intellectual would talk about great victories at chess. An athlete would explain the strategies of his or her favorite types of sports. And, a digital native, or as we describe these people who were born in the digital world, would converse in for normal people about the ins and outs of, for example, World of Warcraft. So games can clearly be found in different shapes, settings, and cultures. In fact, speaking about World of Warcraft, according to the latest Statista reports, the number of active subscribers in World of Warcraft, for example, has reached a total of 5.6 million in 2015. Admittedly, this has decreased from the 10 million active subscribers in 2012, but we do know that 28 of these current numbers, spend more than 30 hours per week immersed in this game world. So what is it that makes us more attracted to the world of play, that somehow engages and motivates us? Well, first of all, I'd like to dedicate some time to defining play and also to try and understand play and game and how game and play intermix together. According to a definition given by Eric Zimmerman, play is the free space of movement with a more rigid structure. For example, play exists both because of and also despite the more rigid structures of a system. So imagine a child playing with a steering wheel of a car. Okay? The car may be a toy car or even a real car, okay, without a key in the ignition. There is no driving and there's no way the child can drive that car. But yet again, just, handling the steering wheel, changing the directions from left to right, would trigger a sense of play in the child as an imagining what it feels like to drive. So game rules, then, are rules that inform, that condition, that give special significance to these social practices of play. Both game and play are difficult to define, but there have been some attempts to understand their meaning and how they function in culture. One of the first scholars to seriously focus on the notion of play was Johan Huizinga, a Dutch historian writing in the first half of the 20th century. In his book Homo Ludens, Huizinga argued that human culture originated in play. This was written in 1938. Huizinga's book was highly ambitious. He sought across a broad range of cultures, literatures, and languages to find evidence of a distinct and separate play concept, which constituted a concretely definable thing. In the course of the book, he claimed play was present in a myriad of cultural practices. According to Huizinga, the play concept was not just found where it might be expected, that is in game and sports, but play also animated law, art, war, poetry, ritual, and philosophy. One of the quotes from Johan Huizinga has been this: "At the root of the sacred rite we recognize unmistakably the imperishable need of man to live in beauty. There is no satisfying this need save in play." So out of these definitions of play, a couple of factors merit some emphasis in our context. So play is something one chooses to do. Play is intensely and utterly absorbing. Play promotes the formation of social groupings. Do we distinguish between games and play? Is there a defining boundary that separates the two? We may decide to look at games or other play activities as existing on a sliding scale, a continuum, of being unregulated to having strict rules. However, we do know that when play is absent from games, then the games become boring. As Popper defined them, they become examples of Shavian reversals. They do more harm than good. Therefore, this world of play needs to be considered if people want to design a good game. To develop a game, designers need to come up with a game concept, which is a detailed idea of what the game is like. It describes what elements are part of it and how they relate to each other in creating such an experience. One of the first things designers do is think of what type of game they are going to design. Although a huge variety of games exist, games can be classified, similar to movies and books, into genres. We are now going to have a look at the various genres that can be pertinent to games. So for the first genre, there is action. An action game requires precision, timing, hand-to-eye coordination, and button pushing. For this reason, action games are also referred to as twitch games. They tend to be simpler than most other types because there is only so much information and complexity that the average brain can interpret in unit time. Consequently, they do not have a long learning curve. The player just needs to know the right buttons, and that is it. If a player asks, "Where is the fire button?" or something similar, then it is obvious that we are dealing with an action game. Other characteristics of action games include twitch speed, so action games are usually fast-paced. When players forget to pay attention, it is too late and they have to start over again. It has levels, so a level is a specifically defined area and game arena in which the objective for the player is to complete a specific task. And action games tend to consist of multiple levels, and upon completion the player can go to the next level. Generally, the difficulty would increase with each subsequent level. Lives and energy. The player usually gets a number of tries to finish the level or even the game. In some cases, the life of a player is depicted with energy. If the amount of energy is depleted, the player loses a life. Time. Some games have a timer that indicates how much time is left for the player to finish a particular level. When it reaches 0, a major event occurs, such as a living breach, and the player might need to start the level again. Time is sometimes also used to get a bonus when finishing the level very quickly. Whether a timer is present or not, in every action, game time is a critical element. The player needs to accurately and timely respond to events. Otherwise, it is game over. Score. A score is an indicator of progress, and action games are pretty much centered around it. Most action games have high score tables, letting the best players show off to other players. The designation action game covers a wide range of game styles. They do not necessarily involve shooting or fighting. They can be very kids-friendly, such as Super Mario or Sonic the Hedgehog. So they do pretty much speak for themselves. We've got Grand Theft Auto, so we've got these games that revolve around a certain action. Adventure. That's another genre, the second genre we are talking about. For adventures, the story becomes central to the whole game. The player has to explore the game world and in the meantime accomplish particular tasks to get to know more about the story. The particular tasks between the storylines can be anything from collecting and manipulating items, puzzle solving, to some combat and action elements, although most adventures have a reduced emphasis on the latter. From a design perspective, the tasks in adventures can be referred to as mini-games, little games within a game. Not every adventure uses this minigame approach. Some have a very consistent type of task throughout the whole game. The best adventures, such as for example the Monkey Island series, make these minigames fit within the setting and the stories. The characteristics of adventure games can be summarized as follows. 1. Story-based. The story is central to adventure games. Conversations, drama, emotions, humor, and other things that make up good narratives should be part of an adventure game. Setting. The setting in an adventure game contributes more to its entertainment value than in any other genre. This setting creates the world the player is going to explore and to live in, and it is for many players the reason for playing adventure games in the first place. Minigame approach, the interactive parts between the stories take a minigame approach. The player gets different challenges across his path, from decoding a cryptic message, collecting items, doing detective work, to sword fighting. Context-sensitive perspective. Since a lot of things in current adventure games is prescribed, most use a context-sensitive perspective. This means that the camera angle changes in each location to a position that would enhance the story or gameplay. Point and click. Most adventures use a point and click user interface. With this interface, the player only needs to use the mouse to play the game. The player just points to objects on the screen with a cursor, for example a door or a character, and then clicks on the object in order to open the door or talk to the character. Dying. In most adventure games, the player cannot die. They are about exploring and not about fighting, so there is nothing that could really kill the player's character. The adventures in which players can die use ways to inform them very clearly that doing something would kill their character. For instance, if a dragon is in a cave, the designers litter the entrance with bones of earlier adventurers. Strategy. The origin of strategy games is rooted in board games. They are obviously centered around strategies. The player needs to deploy these to achieve the goals of the game. As in reality, to deploy a strategy, people must have a good overview of what is happening in the field. So strategy games use perspectives and presentation layers that support these aspects. The perspective that most strategy games tend to use is the isometric perspective. This makes the player look at the game world from a diagonally oriented bird's eye view. This is handy because instead of handling one unit at a time, as with most other games, the player is now able to control multiple units simultaneously. And managing units to achieve a higher goal is basically what strategy games are all about. Presentation layers differ per game, but in every game they are critical. It can organize and simplify the complexity for the player, and if not handled well, it can make the game overwhelming and confusing. Therefore, important characteristics of strategy games are rules. Rules are important in any game, but strategy games are clearly and very visibly centered around them. The rules enable the player to make up their strategies. An example of such a rule could be: an archer can defeat a knight from a distance, but loses up close. Now think of your own Win the City game. Isometric perspective. Strategy games use this diagonally bird's eye perspective as it gives a good overview of the game. Presentation layer. Strategy games have very characteristic ways of organizing information. This organization is important as these games are complex. Economy. Every strategy game has some type of economy. Players can trade with other players or non-players to get to the resources they need or to upgrade existing resources. When playing well, the player is able to buy more and create bigger and better units. In doing this, the player has to balance his incomes and expenditures. Resources. Any strategy game has some type of resources. It might be just plain money, gold, or raw building materials such as wood, stones, water, grain. With these resources, the player is able to get more refined resources such as knights, trains, planes, castles. See, strategy games have a steep learning curve, and not surprisingly, knowing this, they involve much more complicated systems than any of the other game genre. A distinction within this genre is often made between turn-based and real-time strategy games. With the latter, time is a constant pressure. With turn-based games, players can ponder over their moves, but with real-time strategy games, everything happens at once. For these games, reaction time and quick action are as important as strategic thinking. Civilization is a well-known turn-based game, whereas Command & Conquer are well-known real-time strategy games. Virtual world. Over the past few years, one genre has received particular attention. These would be virtual worlds, or rather persistent worlds. Despite the seemingly relatively recent advent of this genre, historical roots of virtual worlds go back to 1978, when MUD, later known as MUD1, ran on the University of Essex network. MUD stands for Multi-User Dungeon, and this term has become synonymous for this early genre. The games in this genre combine elements of role-playing games, fighting, interactive fiction, and online chat. Players can interact with each other and the world by typing commands that resemble a natural language, similarly to the early text adventures. There are various characteristics of virtual worlds. Number one would be social, as hundreds, thousands, if not millions of players can interact by using chat systems or taking up a challenge together or against each other. This makes them inherently social, with all the advantages and disadvantages that follow from this. Bonding may take place, but also misbehavior such as harassment of other players. Community building. One social element which is particularly unique is being able to join a club, guild, faction, or corporation. These are groups of players that have a shared interest in how they play the game. Persistent. These games simply do not stop. When players stop playing, the virtual world lives on. Producers also continue to build on the world by adding content every now and then, and time is irreversible. It is impossible to create the exact situation when many players are involved. Leveling. Similar to character development and experience points in roleplays, virtual worlds involve ever-evolving characters, spaceships, towns, or anything else. Upgrading the game elements is generally known as leveling, as it is often expressed in what the level the player has. With this, players can gain reputation. Most virtual worlds draw heavily upon the role-playing genre. Well-known examples are World of Warcraft and EVE Online. These are referred to as massively multiplayer online role-playing games. Others, which are often the simple browser-type games like the Travian reflect more the strategy type of games. Apart from these game-like worlds exist that are more free-form and open-ended and cannot be called games in a strict sense. Some of these worlds, like Second Life, are about socializing. So games embody the same structure, play, relationship of other ludic activities, where play emerges as the free space of movement within more rigid structures. But the fact that games are so formalized give them a special status in this regard. To create a game is to design a set of game rules, as well as game materials, which are an extension of the rules. The rules of a game serve to limit the player's behaviors. To take part in a game is to submit your behavior to the restrictions of the rules. And rules might not seem like much fun, but once players set the system of a game into motion, play emerges. And play is the opposite of rules. Rules are fixed, rigid, closed, and unambiguous. Play, on the other hand, is uncertain, creative, improvisational, and open-ended. The strange coupling of rules and play is one of the fascinating paradoxes of games. So, to conclude, computer and video games are potentially the most engaging pastime in the history of mankind. This may be due to a combination of some elements, which I'm going to describe below. Games are a form of fun that gives us enjoyment and pleasure. Games are a form of play that gives us intense and passionate involvement. Games have rules that gives us structure. Games have goals that gives us motivation. Games are interactive that gives us doing. Games are adaptive that gives us flow. Games have outcomes and feedback that gives us learning. Games have win states that gives us ego gratification. Games have conflict, competition, challenge, opposition that gives us adrenaline. Games have problem solving that sparks our creativity. Games have interaction that gives us social groups. Games have representation and story that gives us emotion. So this is all for today, and this is all for ICS 5112 from my end about game design. Now it's your turn to design your own Windy City game. and with all these elements in mind, create this balance between reality, meaning, and play to start forming your own game. Good luck for that.